So real quick, when we first started this, I just want to give you a quick introduction to me. I didn't really talk too much about myself, but I think it'll help set the stage for what our next section is here on Emergency Operation Plan, and I call it Going Beyond Compliance. Really, it's Beyond Compliance series. And I had retired from Westchester County Police. My last 8 years, I coordinated our school resource officer program. And one of the things I was really passionate about was working with the schools to develop plans. And you've heard a lot about that today, and different operation plans. I went back to school for my master's, and my focus was on school safety. And again, I felt really passionate about it, so I went back to school for a doctorate, and my doctorate focused on school safety. So I was living in a world where my profession and my academic worlds collided, and I got really immersed in emergency planning and working with the schools. And it was really powerful because I got to see how the academic and things come from that philosophical, theoretical world, and I also got to see how things get implemented on the ground, and I absolutely loved it. I love walking both lines, and that's something that, it's not for everybody, but for me it was something I was really passionate about. So I got to do two things I really love to do. I love being out with people, love making people feel safe, but I also love doing the research on it. So I got to bring those worlds together. So when I was thinking about putting this series together, I wanted to get to the point where plans are really complex. You have a comprehensive school plan. Division of Emergency Management, they do an awesome job putting together that template. But if you take that template and you try to do it all in one shot, you are absolutely overwhelmed. So the idea was break it into pieces, bite-sized pieces. And this is the introduction to that. And what I like to do as we go through this, and we'll have more coming, each month I want to do another section of the plan. It'll be a quick lecture and then some tabletop exercises. So that's the whole concept of this. But I really want to get into the point of why do we plan in the beginning. And we'll talk about why we have plans, disaster response psychology. I like to use the appreciative approach. I don't know if anybody has heard of that or you've heard of positive deviance, but it's a strength-based approach to doing things. I'll explain why I like it. I also will talk about the SOAR framework as it plays into that. I'm going to review the planning process briefly. I know you guys had a lot of that already today. And then I want to explore the state requirements. I'm not going to go into too much detail. I also have Bill Turley from the state here, Division of Emergency Management, Homeland Security. He's the school safety expert. If needed, as I go through those quickly, he'll bring some clarification. But if I get them all done quickly, we'll move on quickly. And I'm going to talk about training and exercise, and then aggregation of marginal gains. Has anybody heard of that before? Aggregation of marginal gains? No. All right, good. So you guys are in for a show. Hang on. So disaster response psychology, why do we have plans? Amanda Ripley did a lot of research on this. She wrote a book on it, The Unthinkable, Who Survives When Disaster Strikes and Why. And when she was doing her research, she found that people go through these different phases. And denial is the first one. Something bad is happening, our brains, our defensive mechanism kick in and we go, no, it's not. That can't be something bad happening. It must be something simple, there must be a way to explain it. For example, I hear a popping noise outside. That can't be gunfire. That must be something else, right? My brain automatically goes into this defensive default mode, and that's that denial, right? Your body goes in this denial, says, nah, it can't be something bad happening. We've all had it. We all go through it. But the next phase, after you get past that denial, and some of that is training, when you learn to actually step through and identify that you're going through that process, you can go to the next phase of deliberation. And in that phase, you're actually starting to look through your options. Some people who had experiences that were life-shaking, right? And they said, my whole life flashed before my eyes. And they really had all these memories go quickly through their eyes. Your brain is going through its Rolodex. That's your deliberation phase. And it goes, do I have something in this Rolodex that can help me in this situation? What do we do when we get panicked? We revert back to either our fight, flight, or freeze or our training. So that's what the brain is doing. It's going through that Rolodex of things that are happening. That's your deliberation. And then decisive moment. It doesn't matter how much you've had, you still have to make the choice to take that action, whether it be, avoid an attack or implement something else, some defensive measure, or activate something else. You have to take that decisive moment. So when she was going through her research, she looked at a lot of different areas, but one of them was the 9/11 attacks. And I think it was really interesting that she said she interviewed, I don't remember all the numbers she interviewed, but it was a good number of people. And she asked them, she goes, when you were going to evacuate, how many people did you talk to? And we're social creatures, right? Sometimes I don't do things without checking with my friends. Hey, what are you doing? What do you think about this? What do you think we should do in this? But even during catastrophes, we're social creatures. We look to each other for guidance. So I'm just going to give you a quick question, put it out to you. Imagine 9/11, right? You're in the building. You might not know all the details. The building shakes. Something bad just happened in the building. Who's just going to get up from their desk and evacuate? Raise your hand off that. Okay, who might go and ask one other person and see what they think? Who might go ask 2 other people before they make a decision? Who would ask 3 other people? Who would ask 4 people? Who would ask 5 people? So what she found, on average, people asked 4 or 5 other people before they evacuated. We are social creatures. We look to each other for guidance. And that's really important because when it comes to taking leadership roles and you step up and start doing something, guess who people are looking at? You. And that's a really important part about emergency response, is that when you take that leadership role, people now look to you because we are social creatures, and you go, this is what we need to do. Follow me. And people love to have that leadership. Again, they're looking for that guidance. We're social creatures all the time. We're looking for people to help us, guide us, and lead us. So we go through these different phases. And one of the other things I think is really important to remember is the physiological process that the body goes through. And these are all estimates, right? This isn't exact. These are estimates, and people fall in different ranges here. This is your heart rates. 60 beats, 90 beats, 120, 150, 175, and these are estimates. So I'm going to start at the first one here, the 60 beats per minute. This is me probably just sitting on my couch. Nothing really going on. I'm just sitting there. Very relaxed. I have full dexterity. I can push the remote. I can do anything like that. I can talk on the phone. I can have a really good conversation. I can think processes through. Everything's getting fine. 90 beats per minute. I would say this is me operating a car in a little bit of traffic, right? I'm not like overstressed, but I'm alert. I'm like, ooh, there's a little traffic here. I got to pay attention to things. I'm not overly excited. My heart rate goes up a little bit, but I am alert. You know, that's why I'm tired after you drive these long trips, because you're paying attention the whole time. I'm in that yellow, that 90 beats per minute. Once you move past that, though, you go to the 120, you start to lose certain things like some dexterity. Your heart rate goes up even higher. Maybe one of the big things athletes like to do is you'll find professional athletes operate in that red zone all the time. And you do lose some fine motor skills. However, they overcome it by training. The nice thing about operating in that red zone is blood goes to your big organs, your legs, your muscles. You can do good things. You're stronger, you're faster, you have more physical ability, whether it be to fight somebody or run away or do whatever it may be. Your body's geared up now. You have the more physical abilities because of that blood pumping through your muscles. You go up a little further, 150, now it starts to get dangerous because you start to lose not only fine motor skills, you start to lose other things like hearing, auditory exclusion, tunnel vision. You start to focus in on certain things. You might even have time dilation. You might lose track of how fast things are going, and things might change. You might feel like slow motion in the way things are responding. And you might think everything's going in slow motion, yet nothing's changed, everything's still going. Then you go to the 175 beats per minute. Past that point, if that's brought on by stress, you're pretty much on pure instinct. Whatever your instincts are, whether to be fight, flight, or freeze, that's what's going on. There's absolutely no cognitive thinking. You're not able to deliberate on a plan. You're just in pure survival mode. So this is the physiological response, and I think it's important to talk about because we're talking about emergency operation plans. And if your training for emergency operation plan was, hey, I'm going to read the plan to you. Okay, any questions? All right, let's go practice. You were like, wait a minute. When a situation happens, my body's going to start going through these areas. Did I actually train and plan for that? And if it was just a lecture in front of a book and you read it, I would say that's not enough. And I'm going to talk about building on that and doing training and exercise as we progress. So your heart rate's way up at the top. You get to that 175 or higher, your body's basically in instinct mode. And when I first got involved in law enforcement, I used to read a lot of stories on the deadly physical force and different encounters. I was a young officer, and you're always concerned about what you don't know about, right? So you're reading about it, making sure you can respond appropriately. And there was one story that sticks with me even to today. And I read this probably my first couple of years when I was on the job. And it was a midnight tour, and a deputy out west, he was just on patrol, not dispatched to anything. He pulled up to a 7-Eleven. And he got out of his car at the 7-Eleven. What he didn't know was the clerk, who should have been behind the counter, was actually tied up in the back, and the store was being robbed. And the robber had a shotgun. And when he walked in the store, he looked. He didn't see anybody behind the desk there, the clerk station. And he didn't think anything of it. It's a midnight shift. They're probably restocking shelves. So he walks down the aisle. He makes a turn to go down the other aisle to get to the coffee. And he finds himself face to face with the robber, who's holding a shotgun and brings the shotgun right up to him. He basically says his whole life flashed before his eyes. You talk about time dilation, auditory exclusion. He couldn't see anything except the center of that guy's chest. He said he thought to himself, I'm going to get killed here and die, and I can't move. My body is frozen, and everything's moving in slow motion. And then he said the strangest thing happened. As he's standing there waiting to die, he looks at this guy's chest, and he sees a little hole appear. And as he starts to realize, he sees the guy go to the ground. And then he realized the guy was shot. And he looks over his shoulder, and he's thinking somebody just saved his life and shot this guy, and he wants to see who it was. Looks down the aisle, there's nobody there. When he looks forward, he's holding his gun and it's smoking. Training, script, practice, drilling. He went to his extreme, right, physiological extreme. His training kicked in and was able to save his life. Now, I'm not saying all the situations, thankfully, are not that extreme. But if people can train, people can drill, that's what we want to do. We want to be able to have it be an automated response. It could save your life. Does anybody know Rick Rescorla? Anybody heard the name before? Rick Rescorla? No. Okay, so you guys are in for another story. Good. Let me back up. Rick Rescorla was a Vietnam veteran, well decorated. In fact, the movie, it was a book, and it later became a movie. We Were Soldiers Once and Young, and then Mel Gibson made it into a movie, We Were Soldiers Once. One of the lieutenants that gets commented, that's the best commander I've ever seen. That character is actually Rick Rescorla. He wasn't in the movie, but the book was based on he was one of the characters technically in the book that they wrote about. He retires from the retires from the military, comes out of Vietnam, well decorated, gets into security. He's working for Morgan Stanley. And they're in the Twin Towers, right? South Tower. He brings in his friend, and he says, doing different security work, correct that. At 1988, there's some international event that happens. Anybody remember what that was? 1988? Pan Am flight, Lockerbie, Scotland. And what happened? The world woke up and said, terrorism is real. It's here. He saw that, and he went out, reached out for his friend who was in counterterrorism, or involved in that kind of stuff with the government, and he said, can you come and do an assessment on my building? So he comes in, looks at it, they go down. His friend goes, you know what, let's go to the basement. They go through, there's no security down there, nobody stops them. He says, this is what I would do. If I was going to attack, I would come into your parking structure here in the basement where there's no security. I'd put a truck filled with explosives next to this column, and I'd detonate it to bring your building down. He goes, thank you, that's good info. Writes up a whole entire plan to bring more critical infrastructure security to the basement parking garage. It's an expensive plan. Brings it to the Port Authority. They say, too expensive, we're not going to do it. They just ignore his recommendations. So fast forward, 1993, what happens? That exact attack happens. That's how they did it the first time. They brought that truck filled with explosives into the basement, parked it probably about 30 feet off from where they thought it was going to be, and detonated it. So we know it didn't bring the buildings down, did extensive damage. Rick Rescorla's credibility is now up here, right? They're like, wow, Rick predicted this, and he said we should put stuff in place. Let's make sure we put more stuff in place. Rick goes back. I think they might have merged now. Morgan Stanley merged with Dean Witter. But anyway, they get together. He's in charge of the whole thing for security. They've got, I think, 20 or so floors in the South Tower. And he says, I think we need to get out of the World Trade Center. He goes, this is just not going to be safe. This is always going to be a target. He said, I'm actually really concerned that somebody's going to take a plane filled with explosives and fly it right into here, and there's nothing we're going to be able to do about it. Again, they're like, our lease isn't up to 2006. He says, I kind of lost faith in the Port Authority because they ignored me. I'm just going to really stress drilling and practicing. He drilled so often, he started butting heads with executives. He made them well, however he could make, evacuate, even though they had special meetings going on and things like that. He's like, no, this is a surprise drill. Everyone evacuates. He started timing employees to make sure they could get down to the next floors fast enough. He was not messing around with his training and drilling. So fast forward 9/11. That morning, the North Tower gets struck. Port Authority gets on the PA system, and they announce at the South Tower, and what do they tell them? They say, stay put in the South Tower. Rick said some other choice words and said, we're getting out of here. Grabbed his bullhorn, grabbed his walkie-talkie, grabbed his radio, and said, evacuate. And what did 2,700 employees do immediately? They evacuated. What happened shortly after that? South Tower got struck. But those people all got out right away because of his drilling and his practicing. No one had questions about how to go down the stairs, where the exit was. He drilled them on it. He practiced with them. He worked them through it. He was last seen on the 10th floor going back up. And he said, I just want to make sure everybody's out before I leave. So he was killed in the building, trying to save more people's lives. So now you've heard about Rick Rescorla. Definitely a hero. I'm going to change gears here and talk a little bit about two little islands, or two little cities on islands. The 2004 tsunami. You had Langi and Jantang, not too far from each other, but the cities were very different. I'll explain why. When the earthquake shook and the tsunami started forming, in Langi, they had about 8 minutes from the time that the earthquake shook and that tsunami started coming till it actually crushed land. I believe the waves were 30 to 45 feet tall. Would kill anybody, right? Anybody in range of that is going to get wiped out. A wall of water will crush you. In Jantang, they had about 20 minutes. So in Langi, interesting thing. Back in 1907, 70% of the population was wiped out by a tsunami. In their culture, in their tradition, they practiced. Anytime the ground shook, they went to higher ground. When the tsunami hit, they had the shortest amount of time to get out of there, 8 minutes. 50% of their structures were all destroyed. No, I'm sorry, 100% of their structures were all destroyed. 0% of their population was killed. Not an infant, not a grandparent, nobody. They all went to higher ground. Unfortunately, in Jantang, they weren't familiar with tsunamis. In fact, when they heard the ocean, that popping noise, they actually thought it might be explosions, and they were concerned it was gunfire from rebels. They went in and locked themselves in their houses. 50% of the population of Jantang was killed. 100% of their structures were destroyed. Again, this example really helps you understand, I think, that not only do you have to have a good response, but you have to have the appropriate response for the catastrophe. That's why our plans have annexes. That's why we add things to these plans. That's why we build them up, so we can cover all these different circumstances, and we train them and we drill them. I'm going to change gears now and talk a little bit about appreciative inquiry. And one of the things I found with this was I actually had 2 graduate classes on this, so I'm going to condense it into 2 minutes. So just bear with me. There's a lot of information here I'm going to try to put out, but I think you'll appreciate it. Because when I first started hearing about this, a lot of this started making sense to me. So appreciative inquiry, these are the 5 original principles, and it changed as things went. But you have Constructionist Principle. And that's pretty much the theory or the idea that our conversation, our dialogue, the words we create, build our world. If we give value to things, they have value because we share that and we construct that. Money has value because we decide it has value, right? As a society, as a culture. Things have value because we assign it value and we work on it. So we create our environment. Words actually can create worlds. This can happen in school. This can happen at home. Who knows how powerful their greetings and the way they communicate with their family and friends make those relationships and can make that atmosphere. You've probably all been in experiences where the atmosphere has been very tight and tense, right? And maybe the conversations were negative or something bad was going on. And then reverse that, you went to other areas where maybe you had really good conversations and you were in good company and people really appreciated each other. Those conversations, they really created that environment. Anticipatory. The idea of appreciative inquiry is we're going to ask questions, we're going to appreciate, but we're going to anticipate towards the positive. I'm going to focus on what's going well and what the strengths are. And when I start focusing and my questions are worded not to, hey, what did you do wrong? But I want to know, what did you do well? I'm anticipating I'm going to get your energy level up. I'm going to get you to start talking about good things that happened. And your energy level is going to go up once you start talking about things that you're doing well or you're passionate about. Simultaneity. Again, your interview question, your inquiry makes change. Inquiry is change. I use my posture all the time. If somebody says, hey, Amery, how's your posture? I open this up and fix it. Their question changed me, right? It's simultaneously, not only did they ask me about it, they also brought some change involved. It also changed me. Poetic. Again, we're not getting too much detail with that, but they talk about stories. You ever ask somebody something they're passionate about, and they start telling you a story about it, and then you can't stop them, right? They get so excited, right? People love stories. And they're like, oh yeah, and then this happened, and then that happened. And they just go on, and they just keep going. We're storytellers, and we love to hear stories. That's the way we're built. And the last one is positive. Again, that focus on the positive. So again, I crammed a little bit of this kind of quickly, but it just kind of sets the stage for the framework of SOAR, which I'm going to talk about next. So you've heard of a SWOT, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Who's heard of that before? Good, good. So one thing they do is they took that and they reframed it into SOAR, strengths, opportunities, aspirations, and results. And I have some questions under here. We'll go through them. But one of the things I propose is when you're doing safety and security, when you're doing drills, when you're evaluating people, you don't want to ignore weaknesses. However, if I walk up to somebody and I just tell them all the bad things they just did, we're human. Like, it's going to be a little upsetting, regardless of what my intentions are. Yeah, but I'm just trying to help them. When I start focusing on the negative, their attention goes to the negative. Not only do people get defensive, they start to shut down and the energy level drops. I use the police officer example. If I had a police officer and I walk up and be like, hey, your shoes aren't shined. Your shirt's untucked and it's wrinkled. I want you to look better so you do a good job. He's gonna be like, all right, you're kind of a jerk, but all right. Right? I focused on the negative. Versus I come up and I inquire, I go, hey, what does a great officer look like to you? I want to show you something. I saw this guy walk in, and maybe I have an example. I say, that guy looks really sharp to me. What do you like about him? I reframed the whole entire thing. Now, I'm talking about his uniform and his dress. Did I tell him how bad he looked? No. Did I bring attention to somebody who's doing something really well and I brought his attention to something positive? Yeah. And we don't ignore weaknesses, we just reframe them. And what I found was after I was sitting through this and I was using it, I said, it clicked. I was like, this is great. Like, I use this all the time, especially with my kids and even coworkers and stuff like that. When people come out and they start focusing on the negative, people get defensive and they shut down. When I focus on what people are doing well and good examples of things they see and be like, hey, I really appreciate the way that person does it, that helps bring change. Appreciative inquiry, it brings change and it brings it towards the positive. It helps people focus on the positive. So here are some questions. And again, I would propose this as your way to after action, any kind of drill, tabletop, security. Think about what works well. Let people talk about what they did well. Let their strengths come up. It's going to empower them. It's going to impassion them, help them really feel good about what they're doing. We're reinforcing that. What should we keep doing? We also look at what systems or resources did we use. If we had a really collaborative team, it was multidisciplinary, put that out there. Let people know, hey, this was really good how you brought in mental health, how you brought in the law enforcement, how you brought in the school security, how you brought in facilities. I really like this. This really worked well. And who do we already collaborate with, right? Who else are we bringing in? Maybe we expand it. We'll go to opportunities. So strengths, opportunities. And again, we're reframing our weaknesses. I'm not saying, hey, this was terrible because you guys didn't do A, B, C, and D. I'm saying, you know what? You guys did really, really, really good. I appreciate what you did here. One thing I would like to see is we could bring in mental health, and I bet you they could bring in some another perspective for us. We could bring in the facilities manager. I bet he could bring a really perspective. We start looking at weaknesses and we reframe them, and those are just examples. You guys, the world is yours, right? To take this stuff and let your own imagination play. What should we stop doing, though? That is definitely something to put in there, especially when it comes to security. Again, not to be negative, but if there's something you're doing that is not working, time to stop doing it, right? Time to stop doing it and regroup. And then we talk about who can we collaborate with? Who else do we need to bring in? So aspirations. This is a big one for me because I know I have a limited perspective and I know I have a limited intellect. But when I tap into resources and I have people who are sitting with me and I say, hey, what inspires you? What aspirations do you have for this? What are the possibilities? No longer am I looking at challenges, but now I'm looking at what the possibilities are. And then I get you going with your imagination. You go, oh, wow, yeah, there's some really neat things we could do. And then topics and ideas that I couldn't even think of, you'll have in your head. And when we work together on that and we start putting things, lining them up, all of a sudden the plan is even better than I could imagine, right? I'm doing a plan. I was thinking we do A, B, and C. And you're like, hey, what about D, E, and F? And I was like, wow, I didn't even think of that. It's a great idea. And then we start to build on that energy, right? We're focused on the positive, build on that energy. And now it's not only my plan, but it's your plan. Whose ideas were these? It was yours and yours and yours and yours. And we're taking them all and we're putting them all into play as best we can. So we get the possibilities going. After the last one there is, what is our ideal? Again, you may never be perfect, but what is our ideal? Let's aim for it. What would be great to have? You know what would be great is if when we hit this button, we were able to get all these responses to happen. Well, how do we make that happen, right? Let's aim for it. Let's go for the ideal. The last one is results. And that's one of the other things I like about having the SOAR is that it brings you back to results. These are great ideas, and I appreciate them. But I think this is where my theoretical and my practical really come together, where the rubber hits the road, right? How do I measure success? We said we're going to make a great plan. How do we measure it? Maybe we do tabletops. Then we do exercises, and we'll talk a little about how that builds. That's how we build on it. What is success to us? Build on strengths. Remember, don't do this alone. Engage others and find out what empowers them, what they're excited about. How do you establish accountability? At the end of the day, when are we going to do it? Who's going to do it? And what are we going to do? Get it down. Write it down. Make it happen. If you look at any of the stuff with creating plans or moving things forward, you have to put it down. You have to put some timelines on things. Otherwise, they're just really great ideas. Put them on paper. Be results-oriented. So that's SOAR. I hope you guys will use this again. I do have an after-action form I will upload to resources off our website for you guys to look at. But I was sold on it right away. And just dealing with people, I've already had good success using this framework. So this is the planning process. I will cover it briefly because I think you guys have already been exposed to it. It's in your plans. One thing I want to talk about is the 6 steps, right? Form your team. Get that framework. Understand the situation. We talked about, threat identification, threat hazards. All these things are in your plan template that you should be doing anyway. Develop your goals. Develop your objectives. Get the plan going, right? Get the plan implemented. When we look at step 5 here, we format it, write it, review it, approve, and share. So up onto here, you were kind of almost like in your set little world, right? Like you might have been working in a smaller group. Once you go past that, though, now you got to train all your stakeholders. Now the plan becomes reality. Right now, everyone knows the plan. You're going to exercise it. You're going to review and revise. But this really should be a circle, right? This is an iterative process. You're going to go back. And if you come up with something new and you're going to make a change, you go back to that collaborative team again. Or maybe you had to expand your collaborative team, and you come back and bring other people in, and you go through the process again. And you could even go through the process for every single annex. You have a new issue, cybersecurity. Maybe we haven't addressed cybersecurity yet. Well, guess what? Let's get the right players in here. Well, our original players on our collaborative effort were mental health, law enforcement, facilities. I really think we need to bring the IT director in. That's a great point. Bring them in. Let's start looking at cybersecurity. But whoever it is, again, you follow that iterative process and go through the steps. So these are the Connecticut State requirements. I'm going to cover them briefly. I have, again, Bill Turley from the state here, just in case anything needs clarification. But again, You already have these. They're, pretty much they come out, they're guidance. I'm just going to cover them quickly just to make sure I hit them. But your municipality and your multidisciplinary involvement, again, one is, are you bringing in all those key players in the municipality? Two, that organized command structure. We're following ICS. We're following NIMS. You have that built into your plan. Three, you have your school safety and security committee. That's made up of your law enforcement, your other first responders, your parents, your faculty, your staff, all those key people that have to be in that plan or in that committee. Four, plans are reviewed, updated, and submitted by November 1st. Five, the local emergency operation plan includes your school plans. Again, you're one component of a big cog, right? We got a whole bunch of stuff, gears rolling right here. So we want to make sure all those plans are in alignment and they're submitted to the appropriate people. The plans include procedures for handling various types of emergencies, including crisis management. Again, that's just all your different crises you're going through, whether it be evacuation, lockdown, secure the school, all those different parts. Any crisis that your school could face, you should have a plan for. At least one evacuation and one crisis response drill are evaluated each year by your local law enforcement first responders. And then at the end, I know you guys submit that drill by July 1st. All your exercises and stuff should be evaluated, right? Like ideally, you want to get them there all the time, but I believe there's at least 2 of them, if that's correct, Bill, that have to be evaluated. That's the requirement.
So basically, every drill, as Amery said, every drill should be evaluated by public safety officials. What we do ask is that on at least one drill per year, that you have multiple public safety officials there. So you have multiple disciplines watching that drill and providing feedback. We know it's not easy to have every drill evaluated and witnessed by a public safety official, but that's where working with your first responders in your community does help to make that happen.
So one drill total? At least one drill.
At least one drill.
Cool. Thank you.
If we have a school resource officer that's in the school that's part of the drill, as police officer in the town, does that meet that requirement?
Yes, it does, but you should, over the course of the year, try and bring in others so that you get different eyes, so they may see other things.
Good. Thank you. Good question. All right, so these are the other 14 here. So we have each school has a vulnerability assessment conducted every 2 years. And you have your Safe School Climate and Committee for each school. And again, they're looking at things like they don't reach bullying, but there's other areas, right? There could be threats, concerning behavior, other behavior that you want to capture and report, bring that back. You should have a committee that does look at that. And again, they would report back to your School Safety and Security Committee. 10, all employees are trained on the plan in cooperation with the Multidisciplinary School Safety and Security Committee. 11, each school has a first responder reference kit with floor plans, keys, etc. Again, all this information is in your plan. This is just a high level touch upon it. 12, each plan follows the Division of Emergency Management Homeland Security template. Again, you have a really comprehensive template. A lot of annexes, a lot of things you can put in there to expand it out. But you have a really great template to work off of. Each plan must contain an emergency communication plan to address deaf, hard of hearing, blind, or visually impaired students. And 14, this is the brand new one for this year, is that each plan must contain emergency action plans for intramural and interscholastic sports. So anything else? We're good. Good. Again, so I just want to cover those quickly just to say it kind of feeds into what we're talking about with the planning is to be in compliance is your first step, and then we want to move beyond compliance, right? But you should know these, and you should be in compliance. That's your first step. So some teams and committees, and I think it was interesting because we had a lot of discussions earlier today about the federal partners who are here and things they do. So the state requirements, you have that School Safety and Security Committee and your Safe School Climate Committee. And again, you can share partners, and there could be different people may overlap, but you're going to want to make sure you distinct what their roles are and what they're talking about. But then a lot is left open for you. And one of the things I talk about first thing right there is the threat assessment team, that process. Having a threat assessment team, I believe, is an important process at the school level. Now, the FBI presentation this morning was excellent and awesome resource, but one of the things I think is important to remember is You have your local team first should be, right? These reports should be going to your local safety and security team first. They should be handling that and then expanding out. You have your local responders, you have law enforcement, you have the federal agencies. They bring such great resources. But this really all starts here with those teams. All that crisis response team, wellness committee, et cetera. I've heard so many different things people have throughout the state. So it's really what fits into yours. And as long as you're following ICS, you have it in your plan and you're following the template, you're good to go. It's really what is working well for you and you're staying within the state guidance. So building block approach. This is another area which I think I'd like to emphasize a little bit more. One of the superintendents I had a conversation with said that, and this was his analogy, he said, I feel like I'm taking my high school team and I'm bringing them right to the playoffs and I didn't even practice once with them. And I was like, wow, that's a really powerful analogy. Think about it. How's a high school team going to do 0 practices and they're there in the playoffs? And I back up to what are my expectations for people I work with and my colleagues? What are expectations in the school? Are we taking people, just giving them a binder and saying, get in there? You know, we're in the playoffs, go. We got to build people up. I think the strength-based approach is a great approach to after action, but I think this is the great model for those building blocks. You have a plan. Did everybody read the plan? Right? Did we do a basic seminar? Did we instruct people on what to do? Do we put a workshop together and let them discuss it and find some issues or concerns or talk through those plans? Do we do a tabletop exercise and say, all right, great, you guys understand the plan now, here's a scenario. Let's see how you're just sitting at a table, let's talk about it, let's see how we do with it. We accomplished that, now we can move up. Now we can start doing some other kind of drills, functional exercises, full-scale exercises. There's a whole building block process here, and I think it's really important just to emphasize that we should build on each block. And again, time is hard, right? We got to make time for these things. But I think this is very important. I got a question coming.
Yeah, it wasn't so much a question as an observation when you were talking about Rick Friscola.
Oh, Rick, yeah.
2,700 people were saved because of the full-scale exercises, right?
He kept doing drills so much that there was no doubt in their people's mind that they had to evacuate. Yeah, they were ready to go. In fact, another interesting point was I believe there was 200 or so people there just on, they were not even part of the organization, they were taking some of the financial exams or tests. But when they got there, the culture was so strong, they said, if you have to evacuate, in case Rick pulls a surprise evacuation drill, here's the door, here's where we go down. They were even informed when they got there. How much of a culture is that of safety and safety-minded people? Great point. So I think training and exercise is important. But again, meet people where they are, right? If you're just in that earlier phase, start there, but don't stay there. Start building. And this is going to feed right into my next slide here when we talk about aggregation of marginal gains. And I'll use an example. These are 1% increases. If I increase by 1% every day, 1% today, and then I'm 1% better the next day, and then I'm 1% better the next day, and then I'm 1% better the next day, you do this mathematically before the end of the day, you are phenomenal. You're very skilled. In fact, I think statistically they say if you use this, I forgot how long you train, you're better than 90% of the people who probably do that, whatever that topic is you're training for, just on average. It's incredible what 1% can do if you're consistent with it and you get better. Unfortunately, it works the opposite way too. If you let yourself slack by 1%, which is, it's just 1%, go down, 1%, go down. By the end of that year, you're down at the bottom again, right? So let's keep it strengths-based, look at what we could do well, and we increase 1%. The British cycling team, prior to 2003, they won, I think, 1 gold medal over like 100 years. They never won a Tour de France. In fact, there was some well-known bike manufacturer that refused to sell bikes to the British cycling team because they didn't want their name associated with them. Then came Coach Dave Brailsford, and he believed in the aggregation of marginal gains and 1% increases. He said, this is what we're going to do. I'm going to take little bits and just slowly help this team 1% at a time. Their clothing they were wearing for the races, they switched from regular garments to indoor cycling garments to shave off just a little bit of time on the races, a little bit of time. He bought special bio reading measures when they did their workouts to help record what their best workouts were and what the conditions were and how could they repeat those. He even got into the massage gels. They just kept looking at other things to improve. They said, hey, these massage gels, let's check, see how they respond to muscle soreness for our athletes so they can recover quickly. How are they sleeping? Even into their pillows and their mattresses to make sure they got a good night's sleep. The inside of their truck, they painted it white so they could see if there's any dust or dirt to help improve the performance of their bikes. 5 years of doing 1% gains. 2008 Olympics. Mind you, they won 1 gold medal in their whole entire 100 whatever years history. 60% of the gold medals the British team won. Fast forward 4 more years. 9 Olympic records, 7 world records. 2012 to 2017, they won 5 of the 6 Tour de France races. Was a British cycler. And he believed in aggregation of marginal gains. Focus on what you can, even 1% increases, but start today. And then just keep adding on, adding on, adding on. So how do we go beyond compliance? Well, first step is what? Be in compliance, right? You got your 14 standards. Make sure you meet those, right? I don't want it just to be check the box, but those are there for a reason. Make sure you got them down. Make sure you got those 14 things and you're good to go. Then I would say understanding disaster response psychology and physiology. We train for sports. We train for all these other events. A crisis affects us no less. What our body goes through, mentally, physically, we should be training and practicing for these things. We understand why we plan. Again, when your heart rate gets that high, no one's making really good decisions. You're going to revert to what you've been trained on. And we have those plans so we don't have to start thinking through this process. We just go to our plan, and now we know how to implement these things. I really believe in SOAR. I believe in helping people focus on what their strengths are, and reframing their weaknesses into opportunities is a great approach to help get buy-in and also help to get the energy level increased for when you do these exercises and these after actions. I remember a superintendent telling me people were afraid it was going to be gotcha. If all your drills are gotcha, are you setting them up for failure? Are they going to look forward to drills? Does anybody want to do a drill if all it is you did this wrong, you did that wrong, you did that wrong? If you start reframing that, right? Yeah, there's opportunities. We're not going to ignore them. There's things we have to fix and make better. But let's not just look at this as you're a problem to fix. You're people. And you're probably my people who are working with me on this. You're my team. I'm going to get my team better by telling my team what they're doing well and helping them build on that. That strengths-based approach. And again, the last part is remember the principles of aggregation of marginal gain. 1%. If that's all you could do, just do it. Do that 1%. And it adds up. 1%, 1%, and it compounds. And then we get better and better at what we're doing. So just to go back, this is the intro to a series we're doing. It's Beyond Compliance. So after this, we're going to start doing annex-specific workshops. And all I want to do is start breaking down your plan into bite-sized pieces each month. More information is going to come out on it, but we're going to pick a different annex. We're going to go over some best practices, and then we're going to give you a scenario and let you test and work through your plan. But I say when you test your scenario, when you do your after action, I would say use SOAR on it, right? Look at what the plan does well. Look at areas and opportunities to improve it. And then ask other people, does this plan really do what we want it to do? Is this what our aspirations are? And maybe we'll be surprised by the input we get from people and say, no, I think our plan should do even more, and here's what I think. And then they start to take ownership of it. So again, those formats will pretty much be, we'll go over state requirements, best practices, and then we'll do a nice tabletop scenario, and we'll use a SOAR framework to debrief. Those will be coming soon. Anybody who's here, just so you know, you're going to be in our newsletter, and we'll have more training and things like that posted there. So any questions? Good. All right, thank you. And I did put my contact information as well as Bill Turley's contact information from the state. So if you guys needed it, please take a picture. But you guys were awesome. Thank you.